Today we return to the writings of Bohemian-born German writer and Nazi Party literary figure Karl Hans Strobl, whose magnum opus Elegabar Cuperus we covered in our third episode along with one of his collections. Today we are focusing on one of his lesser known and lesser reprinted works, his 1920 Umsturz im Jenseits, which can be translated as Coup in the Afterlife or as Putsch in the Afterlife if you want to sound tacky. The story of a revolt of spirits in the afterlife will begin to cause chaos in the living world, attempting to completely overthrow it. The story proper starts with a minor incident at a spiritual seance, where a fake medium, who took up the mantle to make her husband stop whoring around with theatre actresses, suddenly gets more than she bargained for when she gets attacked by a real spirit who begins choking her. This pair never really comes back into focus again, as we switch our focus to Peter Merkel, an inventor and aviator showing off his new revolutionary plane. He almost gets smashed to bits when the plane just suddenly stops working, and only manages to save himself via a miracle which is later explained to have more than natural origins. Just as Merkel is picking himself back together after the near accident, the previously unreachable director Ruben shows up. Ruben, who is supposed to be the chief financier of Merkel's new plane, has been unable to be contacted by anyone, and then suddenly he shows up after the performance claiming that his wife had gone missing. She had been part of the aforementioned seance along with Merkel's fiancé the previous night, but though she was delivered in her car to her own front doorstep, she never made it the 50 steps to her front door. Merkel, Ruben, and a hired detective then head out on her trail, travelling along to the train tracks towards Madrid, since Mrs. Ruben mentioned something in passing about wanting to see Madrid in the car back home while coming home from the seance. Along the way, the society seems to be completely falling apart, trains stopping en masse because conductors get into heated arguments about time zones and the nature of matter. Meanwhile, colonized people rise up in bloody revolts against the colonizers, and a body of explorers travels the Cordillera Mountains to find out the source of a mysterious light. An accompanying poet, and the writer of a journal that narrates the journey and its conclusion, writes about how even the casual murder of one of the local hired help does not help to keep them motivated for long after all the horses and mules just end up running away as if being ridden by mysterious riders. Eventually, just the poet and a man he hates remain in the group, leaving the party behind to travel into a nearby catacomb with a centenarian who eats mummies. The light is so strong now, it shines through solid rock into the cave, and eventually builds up into a great volcanic explosion that kills both the remaining party members, leaving the journal intact by a sheer accident. This is the best part of the whole novel, and it definitely reminds me of At the Mountains of Madness, which is rather curious considering that wouldn't get published for another 16 years. When our main heroes, that in the present, that is Merkel, Mr. Director Ruben, and the detective arrive in Spain, they then speak to the spirit of Goethe himself possessing the body of a dying servant, and Goethe tells them that a group of angry spirits broke into the world and tells them that instead of to look for Ruben's wife in Madrid, they have to look in Algiers because that was an intentional red herring made to delivered to slip them up. What follows an adventure in breaking and entering, shooting possessed blind beggars, and leaving Algiers with the soulless body of Mrs. Ruben. Meanwhile, a council of wise men tries to gather at the St. Peter Basilica in Rome to try and stop the spread of the spiritual infection by their sheer combined force of will, but after 8 days of taking no food, a mob breaks in and finds them all dead. Things start escalating. People start going crazy in the streets. You have whole bands of workers randomly ripping out railway lines and nobody trying to stop them. The police have all abandoned their posts, and a great mysterious haze seems to cover everything in Vienna. Mrs. Ruben ends up being abducted/kidnapped again, and this time by Merkel's friend, a deserter who has been possessed by the ghost of Henry VIII. All while the surrounding houses all across Vienna literally start melting. Merkel's fiancé then astrally summons Mrs. Rubin to find out where she is at the cost of her own life, and Merkel eventually beats up Henry VIII and rescues Rubin's wife. This is another of Strobl's fantastic novels, and it has an apocalyptic tinge to it, just like Eleagabal Couperus, however with the added bonus of being more focused and less distracted with other non-fantastical side plots, but also having a sufficient heap of adventure to keep one interested. The novel isn't overly long, and Strobl refreshingly doesn't narrate the progression of events in excruciating detail. For example, from the recovery of Mrs. Rubin from Algiers, we jump straight to Merkel already being in Rome, awaiting the pronouncement of the failed Council of Intellectuals, and then after they all are found dead, we skip again to him already having returned to Vienna. Similarly, Strobl doesn't drown out his audience in spiritual nonsense, and the explanations he gives for what is going on, while talking a bit about spheres and dimensions and all that, are just long enough to explain what's going on, and just short enough to where whatever the spiritual equivalent is of technobabble doesn't seriously get on your nerves. If you can read German, I do advise you to read this. It isn't exactly a masterpiece, like say Alfred Kubin's Die andere Seite. However, it is still very entertaining, very interesting, and it has very nice scenes, and overall there are some twists and turns to this which are a little bit out of the ordinary and a little unusual, so you won't find yourself being able to predict everything that happens in it.